Bread and beer are so entwined with human civilization and especially Bavarian German culture. The earliest reports show that around 10,000 years ago is when human civilization started to begin with the cultivation, with the settling in order to grow these crops. The earliest record of wheat being grown for agricultural purposes by humans is 9600 BC. That's a long time ago. With that time, through selection of grains, they were able to cultivate and grow grain that was specific for bread making. Well, shortly thereafter, the cultivation and domestication of barley came along. Barley was being produced for beer. Two distinct grains that came out of this early civilization to feed two different needs. Wheat for bread, barley for beer. Wheat, hardy grower, widespread, high gluten content that made it stretchy and formable to make bread. Barley, with its husk and its high starch content, contributed to the beer making. All the things that make wheat suitable for bread making make it somewhat undesirable for beer making. High protein content, gums, glucans, all these things that bind and form to make that bread make it very difficult to take that grain, extract the starch, and end up with a liquid that you can consume. Barley, being domesticated a little bit later, found its way into being the beer grain. Through domestication, propagation, cultivation, we have these two grains growing up with humans and being controlled and manipulated in ways in which it benefits both of those things. Wheat ultimately has become an incredible commodity for bread and has been grown specifically and so in tune with that end product. Barley, the same way, has been propagated and grown to be appropriate for beer. Very protected and controlled in order to have high extract, low protein, so that we can get a very nice, clean, clear beer at the end. Now, to use either of these grains in their forms as brewers, we must first malt them. Beer can be made from unmalted grains. It's not very good. We get so much flavor contributed and formed during the malting process that we're familiar with, that we enjoy it. One point in my career, I had a brewing intern from the Scandinavian Brewing School who worked on a project to do raw barley beers. A great concept, energy efficient, water efficient, cutting down on that whole process that occurs before we get the grain as brewers. But the end product, it wasn't that good. We need that malting to create what we know as beer. Now, malting is this crazy thing. This seed here has everything necessary for the first stages of life to grow into a plant. The energy, the proteins, the amino acids, the ability to create and release these enzymes that degrade those starches. Well, what the maltster will do is recreate that atmosphere of springtime. They will try and fool that grain into thinking that it's going to grow into a plant. So they'll first steep the grain. They'll put it in a warm water bath. Spring rains coming down. At the end of steeping, that grain will plump up, grow, it'll absorb that water that will facilitate all those first stages of life. At that point, the grain gets dumped and goes into big germination beds. At that point, the grain starts to grow. It puts out rootlets. It puts out acrospires. It starts to grow into a plant. Well, it's growing into a plant because it's consuming and using those energy stores by releasing enzymes to break down the big starches that are in there to provide the energy necessary for those first stages of life. If that goes on too long, then we have nothing left for the yeast to consume later on in the brewing process. So the maltster will then stop that, and it's in that process of stopping that growth that we then create this myriad of other flavors that are so desirable in beer. We can create everything from base grains that are the basis for all beers, that have the high enzymatic capability to degrade starches from other grains into fermentable sugars for the yeast. Your Pilsner malt, your pale ale malt. Beyond that, you get into some of the toasted malts, where the maltster will add higher heat for shorter periods of times to create warm, toasty characteristics, getting Munich malt, Vienna malt. Then we get into the roasted malts, where the maltster will take that grain, high heat for long times to actually char and carbonize and create these really deep, dark flavors: chocolate, roast, acrid, smoke, coffee. And then there's this whole other string of grains, the caramel malts or the crystal malts, in which the grains are actually stewed in order to start caramelizing the sugars that are held within to create all the raisiny, dark fruit characters that are really, really delicious. Now, wheat can be done in the same way as barley, and we can create all these different malts at the same scale. So wheat malt has a high starch content. There's a lot of extract that we can yield out of that grain for the brew house. Unfortunately, unlocking and getting at that malt proves difficult when it comes time to make the beer. That wheat does not have that beautiful husk that the barley grain has that helps to form and acts as a natural filter bed in the brewing process. Wheat also brings a very soft character to beer. We can add a lot of wheat to provide a lot of extract without getting this cloyingly sweet character that we would typically get from all barley beer. Wheat also provides a lot of protein to the end product, which helps form and stabilize a good long-lasting head, as well as contribute some haze characteristics that are so desirable in some of the wheat beers and some of the newer hazy beers today.